Good morning to all of you. It certainly is good to see you here for our morning worship service. Please stick around after our service this morning. I can smell the meatballs. So stick around so you can join us and we can have an opportunity to kind of get to know each other maybe a little bit better. Don't forget tonight, our young people and their folks, if they're going to stay, make sure you sign up so we can have an idea of how much pizza to order for our gathering after services this evening. You know, in Matthew chapter 5, we have the kind of the prologue or the prelude to the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon that's ever been given. And Jesus starts that sermon with what we have commonly called the Beatitudes. And a lot of people have said the Beatitudes, a good way to describe that are beautiful attitudes that we should have. And so this morning, when we talk about beautiful attitudes, we want to look at verse 7 in particular of Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. The Greek word for mercy is really kind of a rich word. It means to help those who are afflicted, to bring help to the wretched. And we'll talk more about that as we kind of work through the lesson this morning, to help the afflicted and help the wretched. You know, when I think of those words, I think of individuals who are really kind of at the lower rung of the ladder of life, right? People who are really destitute, the people that other individuals kind of walk on by, who don't take the time for. And Jesus says, be merciful. Help those people out. Show compassion to those individuals. I think Jesus is saying a Christian must be something that is merciful before he can do something. Our Father, Ephesians 2:4, who is rich in mercy, expects as much of His children and promises the same merciful treatment to them as they extend to others. Someone said, and this is the title of the lesson this morning, mercy is God's ministry to the miserable. That's you and I. We're the miserable. We are the lowlifes. We are the wretched. We are the individuals who are afflicted. God's ministry, His mercy to those of us who are spiritually at the bottom rungs of the ladder. Our lives should be an extension of God's and what He does for us. William Barclay described mercy as getting inside another's skin until we can see with their eyes, think with their mind, and feel with their feelings, to move and to act on behalf of those who are hurting. Mercy is compassionate action. It is being Jesus, who often moved with compassion, met the needs that were ever before Him. It's kind of interesting, you know, in Cincinnati we have a healthcare system called Mercy, right? And you go across the United States and even across the world, and there are a number of hospitals called Mercy Hospital. And that's because the ministry of those hospitals is to render service to those who are miserable, to those who are afflicted, to those who are at the very bottom. And that's what we do, or we should be doing, spiritually. Now, the Bible really presents two sides of mercy. First of all, we have the parable of the unforgiving servant that's found in Matthew 18:21 through 35. Now, this parable was told by Jesus because He was confronted by a question from Peter. And Peter said, how often should I forgive my brother? How often should I extend my mercy? And Jesus said, let me tell you a story. And He tells the story of a servant who owed a king 10,000 talents, which was an astronomical sum, a sum that there was no way that he could repay if he lived 1,000 lifetimes. In our minds, it might be someone that we owed $1 billion to. There's no way we could repay that debt. No way at all. And so he goes to the king and he says, there's no way I can repay this debt. And what should have happened to him, he should have been sent, as was customary in those days, to a debtor's prison. And so the king had mercy upon him. He said, debt forgiven. Can you imagine to owe that kind of money? Money you could have never repaid? Money that would have put you into a debtor's prison for the rest of your life, estranged from your children, estranged from your family and from your friends. And the king says, forget it. Don't worry about it. The debt's been taken away. Can you imagine the relief? Can you imagine the ulcer that would have went away? You would have felt so good, so light on your feet. And yet this very servant who had been forgiven, who had received mercy from such a great debt, runs into a fellow servant who owes him some money. He owes him 100 denarii. Well, a denarius was a day's wage. So it was a sum of money, but it was a sum of money that could reasonably be repaid over time. And yet this great mercy he had extended upon him, he finds a fellow servant who owes really a small amount of money. And he says, no way, you're going into debtor's prison. I'm going to send you off away from your family, away from your friends. It's kind of interesting in this parable, the people who alerted the king as to what had happened were the man's fellow servants. They had seen a great debt forgiven, and yet had seen him not forgive a small debt. He was brought before the king, and the king said, an obvious statement, this makes no sense. I forgave you a great debt, and yet you could not forgive a small debt. I showed you great mercy, and yet you were unable to extend a little bit of mercy to someone else. We are confronted with our need to grant mercy and forgive because of the mercy and forgiveness that has been given to us. Someone wrote this, when I genuinely forgive, I set a prisoner free and discover that the prisoner I set free was me. Jesus ended this parable by asking a simple question. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? The forgiven should freely forgive. One shown mercy should extend it to others. That's really a parable of being unmerciful. And I think on the flip side of that coin, we have the story, the parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, 25 through 37. You know that story. There was a Jewish man who was traveling a road, kind of a bad part of town, as we might say today. And as he was traveling in that bad part of town, that back alleyway, he was beaten by robbers and left for dead. A difficult situation to find yourself in. We have a priest and a Levite who come by, people that you would expect to render mercy to a fellow Jew, and yet they did not. They saw the plight and they walked on by. How many times do we see someone in need? We see it, but we walk on by. Let somebody else take care of it. Well, the man who took care of it was a Samaritan. There was great disdain, as you know, between Samaritans and Jews. In fact, Jews called Samaritans dogs to their faces. They were considered half-breeds. They were a mixed race. They weren't a purebred race, according to the Jews. And so they had little regard for Samaritans. And yet a Samaritan came across a Jew. He could have easily finished him off. That's probably what a lot of Samaritans would have done. But instead, he showed tremendous mercy upon this Jew that he found in need. I think in this story, we find 4 essential elements of what it means to be merciful. First of all, merciful people see needs. Like the priest and the Levite, we all see those in need daily. But like the Samaritan, only a few really see the need. Secondly, merciful people are moved emotionally in their inner core. They are moved by the needs of others. The Samaritan took pity upon him. Mercy involves an emotional response. And the Bible calls that emotional response compassion. He had compassion when he saw someone who was in need. Third, merciful people take action. The Samaritan went to him, the text says. Mercy in theory is meaningless. Merciful people are not reactors, they are responders when they see a need. And then finally, merciful people carry through in the meeting of needs. While we may attempt, as was the case in this parable, to try to define who is my neighbor, Jesus makes the point, anyone who is in need fits the bill. We're that way, aren't we, sometimes? We go, well, I don't know if I should help this person. They're a little shady. I don't know if I should help this person. They've asked for help before. I don't know if I should help this person. I don't trust them. I don't know if I should help this person. They've abused me in the past. And Jesus says, whoever is in need. Pretty open, isn't it? Whoever is in need, that's who we should extend mercy to. The Samaritan didn't know if this was a trick. Maybe there were the thieves still waiting behind to beat him up too. He had no regard for himself and instead helped out someone who is in need. Further, there are other examples that could be cited in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Biblically, mercy is Abraham, who rescued his nephew Lot after Lot had taken advantage of him in Genesis 14. Remember that? Abraham was the older one. Here's the beautiful area. Where are you going to choose? Of course, Lot chose the nice area in which to dwell. And then later, when Lot found himself captured by an enemy king, Abraham, without hesitation, went in to rescue his nephew. He didn't give it a second thought, even though he had kind of done him wrong earlier in time. What about Joseph in Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 21? I mean, of all people, think about this. Your own siblings sell you out? Your own siblings sell you to a band of slave traders? That's pretty low, isn't it? I know sometimes siblings don't get along, but that's pretty low. And in fact, prior to doing that, they thought about even killing their brother. That's pretty low as well. And he had spent all this time in an Egyptian prison, not a pleasant place. You would think that once he was confronted with his brothers again, he would say, I'm not showing mercy to these guys. I'm going to get even, right? That's kind of how we think sometimes. And yet, here's a perfect example. Treated horribly, and yet he extended mercy. Moses, who pleaded for God to heal Miriam. She was cast with leprosy because she had rebelled against his leadership. And yet Moses interceded on her behalf, merciful to her. What about David? 1 Samuel 24 and other passages as well. On many occasions, he had the opportunity to kill Saul. He knew he was to be the king, and yet he showed mercy upon God's anointed, the king. What about Stephen in Acts chapter 7? Remember that? Stephen was being stoned. And we're not talking about gravel being thrown at someone. We're talking about major rocks that would take a lot of strength for a strong man to lift up, and someone who's in a pit and throwing stones at someone to kill them. There's not a lot of mercy there. And yet Stephen said, forgive them. Forgive them. Have mercy upon them. On those kinds of people, That's what Stephen said. And then what about Jesus? In Matthew chapter 14 and verse 14, he fed the crowds. He fed the crowds who were hungry. He met their physical needs, even though he knew it was that same crowd that would eventually say, "Crucify him," and would show no mercy towards him. Mercy is meeting people's needs wherever they are, in whatever situation they find themselves. It's more than a feeling. It involves doing. It is meeting the needs of others in a tangible, practical way. Mercy is living, acting, and doing the things Jesus would do if he found himself in the same situation. Mercy extended is not about one's worthiness. There's a story from history, and maybe you've heard it, of a woman who appeared before Napoleon pleading for the life of her son. Her son was due to be executed. Napoleon responded that the punishment fit the crime and that justice was being served for her son. The woman responded, "It wouldn't be mercy if he got what he deserved. Mercy is what I'm asking for." So, taken by her response, Napoleon granted her son pardon. In praising God for his mercies, David stated, "He has not dealt with us according to our sins." And aren't you glad? Right? Aren't we all glad that God has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor punished us according to our iniquities? Psalm 103 and verse 10. Why is that? Why is it that we're all still here today living and breathing? Because God is merciful. We deserve death because of our sin, but he's extended compassion to us. If God does that for us, who are we to not extend it to others? And therein lies the two great motivators to extending mercy. Number one, I must always remember how merciful God has been to me. Like the servant in Matthew chapter 18, my sin debt has been forgiven. How can I not be like my Father and return the favor? I did not deserve it. God forgave me. Who am I to not forgive you? I need to do that. And secondly, I must always remember my own need for mercy. All of us need to be bathed in mercy. We need it for our own salvation. It couldn't be clearer. Those, James chapter 3, 13 through 16, those who show no mercy, guess what? Receive no mercy. Those who show no mercy, receive no mercy. And Matthew 6 and verse 15, those who refuse to forgive will not be forgiven. I need to forgive for my own sake. You need to show mercy for your own sake. Because if I don't forgive you, if I hold a grudge, I can't afford for God to hold that against me in the day of judgment. I've got to be freewheeling when it comes to mercy and when it comes to forgiveness. As the wise man said in Proverbs 11:17, the merciful man helps himself. And how does the merciful man help himself? By being merciful to those he comes in contact with. So, practically speaking, what does all this mean for you and I, practically speaking? In an attempt to make this practical and to evaluate my own life and your own life, I think here's some questions that might be helpful for us. Am I patient and understanding with the peculiar? Now, I know you don't know any peculiar people, do you? You might be one of them, right? We all know people who are a little bit odd, right? However you want to define that, right? People who are a little bit different. You work with them, you know them. They're in your kids' ball league, right? You know people who are peculiar. That's a nice way of asking, Brian, how do I treat weird people? However you define weird, right? How do I treat people who aren't like me? Right? Because we tend to think we've got it all together, right? So how do I treat people who are weird, who are peculiar? What is my attitude toward them? Mercy demands tolerance. Paul tells us to be patient with all men. 1 Thessalonians 5:14. And to accept one another as Christ has accepted you. Romans 15:7. I like this. You'll like it too because it's so true, and you need to tattoo it on your heart. Hurtful people are hurting people. Remember that and be kind. Hurtful people are people who are hurting themselves. Isn't that true? People who are mean to you are people who are hurting inside. Boy, that helps me. Does it help you? Because some people I don't want to be nice to. Some people I don't want to be merciful to because they're just mean and nasty. But the truth is, most of the time they're mean and nasty because they're hurting on the inside. Someone has hurt them. Someone has abused them. Maybe it was the home they grew up in. That's not an excuse. Maybe it's the relationship they're in. That's not an excuse. Maybe it's the situation they find themselves in. That's not an excuse. I'm not giving them a pass. But I'm saying hurtful people are hurting people. That helps me when I interact with them and they're cutting to me. Secondly, am I quick to forgive? Is it easier to rub it out or to rub it in? Do I point a finger or do I lend a hand? In Colossians 3:13, Paul said, be ready to forgive. Be ready. And Jesus told Peter, as we said in Matthew chapter 18, verse 22, forgiveness has no limits. Third, am I quick to help? Galatians 6 and verse 10, we talked about that in Bible class this morning. We're to do good unto all men. John Wesley's motto was this: do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, to all the people you can, as long as you can. And fourth, do I do good to my enemies? Now, we like to think enemies, that's like battles and wars and, the soldiers with the different uniforms on. That's the enemy. No, that's really not when we're talking about enemy here. In fact, in the original language, the word enemy simply means this: someone you have hostility with, someone you're not reconciled with. That's your enemy. You got some enemies now? Is there somebody that you have some hostility with? Maybe it's that brother-in-law you don't get along with too well, right? Maybe it's that coworker. Maybe it's your boss. Maybe it's an employee. Maybe it's someone at school. Maybe it's a neighbor. Who is it that you have hostility with? That's your enemy. Who is it that you're not reconciled with? That's your enemy. It could be a coworker. It could be a boss. It could be family. It could be neighbor. Jesus will deal with this more specifically later in the Sermon on the Mount. But the ultimate act of mercy is how you treat your enemies. You really get no credit for showing mercy to people who are nice to you, because that's like a given, right? It's easy to be nice to people who are nice to you, right? You get like zero credit for that. Remember that, zero. Big zero credit, okay? But when you show mercy to people who are your enemies, that's where you're racking up some credit, right? Because that's where it's difficult. That's where it's challenging to do that. As we kind of bring all this together and try to encapsulate it, I have two challenges for you this morning. Two challenges that everyone faces and that most merciful people meet. Number one, who do you need to release from their debt today? Who do you need to be merciful to? Nothing proves more clearly that we have received mercy than our willingness to forgive other people. Who do you need to erase from the ledger, the individual that you've been holding a grudge with or upon. And then secondly, what hurting person do you need to help this week? You see, there are some people who beat up, the thieves, right? There are some people who pass up, the Levite and the priest, and there are other people who pick up, like the Good Samaritan. So this week, as you encounter people, situations, circumstances, the question for you is really simple. Who are you going to beat up? Who are you going to pass up? And who are you going to pick up? Because that's what mercy does. Merciful people are in the picking up business. We extend that compassion to people that we find who are in need, and we do that to people who are weird and odd and wretched, all of those people. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall what? Obtain mercy. And we need it. We need it. How are you showing mercy to the miserable? It starts with you and it extends to others. This morning, if you're not a New Testament Christian, the first thing I want to encourage you to do is accept the mercy. God has compassion upon you. God has said, I want to forgive you of your sins. Come unto me if you're weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Accept me. Be baptized into Christ. Accept my mercy. And then extend it to others. Maybe you are a child of God. You did that. You were baptized once upon a time. That's good. You did the right thing. I'm glad you did. But maybe you've not been a very merciful person. If there's something you need to straighten out in your own life, I encourage you to pray to God. Pray to God daily that you can show compassion and mercy to those who are in need. If we as a congregation, if the elders can pray with you and for you to give you the strength that you need, we want to do that. If we can help you in any way, won't you? Please come forward while together we stand and sing to encourage you.
Good evening, church. If you have your Bibles, if you're open to Psalm 46, Psalm 46. Thank you so much for your prayers. I enjoyed the lectureship very much. When I was finished, I looked down last night as I visited with the elders. I had put on 900 miles since Sunday. So it was a nice trip. Got to eat with Jenny's mom. She invited me to sit down with them even, and I felt like I was at home. You know, such a wonderful family. Work. I saw something posted today. Cheryl said that Bill had a job opening where he works, and I talked to Amanda, and she told me about how her knee hurt, and she's got a different job, and thought about the work that I've been doing. And work is wonderful, yet sometimes that work isn't always pleasurable, is it? But it's in working very hard that some beautiful things happen. What is the one aspect of the work you do that you really don't like? Is there anything in your work that you would rather not do? I love my work. I love every part of my work. The part of my work I don't like is my off day, when I'm not working. Because on that day, I decided I would do something that I really did not enjoy to show my wife how much I love her. I do the washing. And what good can come out of doing washing, right? Every week, the same things. You've got to sort it out, locks, lights, go through all the pockets, and every now and then you miss a Kleenex, and it's all over the place. And well, I've gotten pretty good with experience because I don't like to do the cleanup. When I opened the dryer this time round, after having completed everything, and the white was the last thing, guess what I found in the washing? A pen. But it wasn't this pen. If it was this pen, I would have had a problem. It was a silver pen, a bullet pen that an insurance company guy gave me for helping with some thing to raise funds for poor children in our area for food. And it had on the one side a tip where you could write on one of these things, and on the other side there was a light. And I opened the dryer, and guess what I see? Even after the washing is finished, the dryer is finished, I see this light going around. I felt so good, you know. In the work, in the middle of the work, would I ever find something I really, really enjoyed? And sure enough, there it was. Well, when it comes to the work that we do, it's when we do the work that God wants us to do that we see something really wonderful. And the work that I'm talking about right now is worship. Worship is a work. You know, when we come together here and we are singing together, it's not just the song leader, it's every one of us. And it means nothing if we don't put energy into it, if we don't think what we were singing. The first song, what was it? Something about sending a light. So I thought, well, I can tell people about the light, right? So there we go. Work is the next one. Oh, I can talk to you about working in light. You see, you've got to be engaged in what's happening, and it becomes so much more meaningful. It becomes part of who you are. The prayers, so much more meaningful if you are engaged with those prayers. Think about the prayers. And when something is mentioned and you know something more about it, pray about that. Or if something's going on in your life, like my sister had surgery today, and it may not be mentioned, well, that will also go into the prayers. It means so much if you're part of it, if you're collectively working with worship. The giving, the Lord's Supper, every aspect of it has to be our energy in it. When the sermon is being preached, it's easy to be a lazy listener, but if you're an active listener, you get so much more out of it. Don't listen for what the preacher is saying. The preacher is giving you words. What is God saying? What is He doing to your mind with those words? When it comes to worship, there are three words that we find out to describe worship. The first one is shachna, or shachah, sorry. And shachah is the Hebrew word that means to depress or to bow down or prostrate. The Greek word proskuneo, and there's a latereo and others also, but proskuneo is mentioned more than the others. Also, the Hebrew's got more than one word. That one's just mentioned more. Proskuneo means to kiss, to bow down towards. When you come to the English word worship, it means to be worthy. So when you think about all of this, you realize worship is something that you have to become worthy of, but it's also who initiates the worship. And in my case, when I looked at that tumble dry and I looked at the light, who initiated that? I didn't initiate that. That light was there. It had clicked on automatically, but immediately my soul responds to it, and I'm thinking, this little light of mine, you know. But it came from somewhere else. It didn't come from me. And when it comes to worship, it's something that comes from God as well. And so we can look at Exodus chapter 3, and we can see Moses. In Exodus 3 verse 5, we hear these words, "Do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." So God initiates worship, and He's doing it through the songs that's being sung. He's doing it through the prayers. He's doing it through this Lord's Supper that's being served. He initiates this. The very reason we come together is because of the death of Christ. And so it's initiated from Him. We in turn have to respond. If we don't, then what is our worship? If we're not responding to what's going on, what is our worship? It's dry. It's meaningless. How many times have you not sat here and you've heard the singing, and that perks you on and makes you excited? How many times have I not been here and together with the song leaders, and they lead in the singing, I'm looking and I'm seeing tears rolling down your eyes. And it's responding from me now. Now I'm part of it, and you got it from God first. But you can hear it in people's voices when they are praising God, when they're worshiping God. One of my favorite times of the year is after CYC and the youth come back and they sing. It's just like, whoa, what happened? It's like this bulb, you know. Last week was kind of dull. This week it's so bright. And it's infectious. It's contagious. So when we look at Psalm 46, what I want you to do is I want you to work. I want you to let God speak to your soul, and let's see what you can get out of it. The first one, verse 1, I think what God is telling us is we can find security and peace because He's watching over us. And so here it is. God, Psalm 46, verse 1, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. When last did you need that verse? This was one of my verses 2 days ago. So happy, you know. Wow, look at that. God is speaking to me. I was really enjoying the lectureship, and it's about 4 o'clock Monday afternoon, and I get this text from Doreen. She says, "I'm okay, but the deer aren't." Somebody was driving right on a bumper, and I don't know how many, was it 6? 6 of these deer ran in front of her car. She managed to miss most of them except 2. Clipped them on the sides. But there's something happening right there, right? We live in the world forces events on you, you're not isolated, and you need God. And at that point, God is your strength, a very present help in a time of trouble. You need to be in a forgiving mood. You mustn't be upset with the person behind you. If I'm hearing it and I'm a distance away, I mustn't be concerned about it, and so on. God is a very present help in times of trouble. And then verse 2, I'm working now. God's giving me these words, and I'm reflecting back to God what I'm getting. And here I'm getting the fact that God is dependable. Therefore, we will not fear. In all these circumstances, listen, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling, Selah. All these things happening. I'm okay. God is watching me. He's protecting me, and I can rely on God. And then verse 4 and 5, I saw verse 5 on Facebook today, on somebody's Facebook, and it was quoted as if it was on behalf of a woman, but it's actually on behalf of heaven. And I suppose it's more than one application. But here I can see God's heavenly river that we read about in Revelation also, bringing us so much joy. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. And so there we have something else. God is there. He's like a river. He's like a source of life. He runs through my veins every day that I can pick up the word and read it. He is there. And then we see in verse 6, the powerful destruction of the world. You get upset with some of the things you see on TV? I saw the blackness coming out of a university today that starts with a B. I thought, wow, look at that. And all the evil. And I'm not upset with the humans in it. I'm upset with the devil that intervenes and interferes in the unity that we have in our country. And then I listen to how God says, you're in the kingdom. You're stable. Nothing can hurt you because you're solid in the kingdom. The nations rage. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice. The earth melts, just uttering his voice. Be still, see? The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress, Selah. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolation on the earth. Just so easy. So much of in the Old Testament I'm reading at the moment, God just says, you stand back, I'll take care of it. And he just wipes out armies. And then we see here in verse 9, because we worked hard, because you didn't fall asleep, because you focused, because you concentrate, because your minds were engaged, here's your gift. You worship God, you worship before him, now here's what he gives you. Verse 9, he makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. He makes peace, perfect peace. And here in verse 10 is how your soul reflects as you walk away. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress, Selah. Today we have computers around us all the time. We struggle to break away, but God is saying to us, you can. This is yours. This is your gift. I'm wanting to give you this. We're in front of a very, very scary and awesome and fierce God. He's always there. How many times have you been on a dentist's chair and the dentist said something to you that didn't make sense? Like maybe you're going to have a root canal and he says, just relax. Right? Well, how do you relax at that point, right? Well, this is where we find ourselves in this world. We're on this dentist chair and these things are happening and God is saying to us, relax. It's going to be okay. If you want to accept the invitation today, God is telling you no matter what's going on, at least this is what I'm getting, no matter what's going on, he's there. I don't have to worry. He's always with me. If you want to be subject to the gospel invitation, starting your gospel journey with God by dying with Jesus, being buried with Jesus, resurrecting to walk a new life, or if you just need the prayers of the church to find comfort and solace in your soul again, please come forward, accept this invitation right now as together we stand and sing.